Father's Day to the fathers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Father's Day, everybody.
Happy Father's Day.
Hey, good morning.
Oh, hi.
Jonathan here. I am, today, I'm going to talk about the silver chair. And what's totally interesting is the camera's now facing me, so I can see all of you as you get distracted, go get coffee, hang up. So there's a degree of accountability and transparency that I find a little unnerving. But we'll proceed just the same. It's I'm here with Gar, and we're going to do our shtick. So this is a fabulous book, The Silver Chair, and it is like the fourth book in the series, although it was written after The Horse and His Boy, which follows it, but published before. So there's a couple little glitches about it. This book came out in 1953, and in it, it contains one of two of Lewis's favorite characters. The first is Reepicheep, who we saw last week in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And the second is Puddleglum, the marsh wiggle, who is essentially the image of faith and the person that helps the children through their adventures. So I thought it would be fun to share a little bit about who Puddleglum is based after, and then we'll get into the book. So stepping back, this talk's going to have 3 parts, unless I meander into 4, maybe 5. The first part is sort of an overview. The second part will be going through key quotations and thoughts from the book, largely dealing with faith, journey, following signs. Those are the key themes of the book. And you'll be relieved that I'm probably going to skip some of these. So don't worry, I won't go through every single one of my yellow stickies. And then the third part are questions. So be thoughtful on your questions, and we'll move through each of these things. I'll try to be about 20 minutes, 25 minutes in my semi-prepared remarks, and then we'll go on. So first, in way of background, because I think it is fun to have a little bit of context, Lewis based the character of Puddleglum on Fred Paxford, who was essentially the caretaker of the kilns. So he did all the grocery shopping, he managed the gardens, and he essentially kept track of the place. And so here is a description of him from George Sayre, who was actually a good friend of Lewis and wrote, I think should be considered the definitive biography. I don't think it's particularly the best one, but since he knew Lewis, it's a book that should be in everybody's Lewis library. And it's a good read. So quoting, this is about Paxford. Paxford was a great character, an unkempt, burly Oxfordshire countryman of the same age as Jack, that's what they call C.S. Lewis, earthy in the best sense of the word and unspoiled by book learning. He had a deep, intuitive understanding of plants, animals, and people, and was unswervingly loyal to his employers, yet an independent thinker with great integrity. A remarkably frugal man, he had all the skills of the traditional handyman and would make do in every way possible, never buying something new that he could patch up. So the other famous anecdote about Paxford is late in his life, Lewis took the only plane ride he ever took. And he was very nervous about it. He had never flown. He and Joy were going to Greece, actually with George Sayre and his wife, the year before Joy died. And right when they're pulling away to go to the airport, Paxford leans in the windows and said, "Did you hear about that flight? Crashed. Everybody died." That was his last words before Lewis went to take his only flight in his entire life. So that is Paxford, and that gives you a little sense about Puddleglum and who Puddleglum's based on. So in this book, I'm going to highlight couple of key things. The first is going to be the transformation of Eustace, who we met in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And then we'll spend time talking about Jill and essentially the journey of faith with an awful lot of puddle glum in between. And I'll work through the book and my stickums in some somewhat chronological order of the book and highlight these things. So, as you recall, when we meet Eustace in the last book, he was a cousin of the Pevensey children who went through the wardrobe. This is how this book opens up. This is the last book we read. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. And so that was Eustace, the big stinker, the guy that got de-dragoned. And this book is largely about the transformation of Eustace. We now find Eustace in the next book that we're reading today, the Silver Chair. Now look how Lewis describes Eustace here. His name, unfortunately, was Eustace Scrubb, but he wasn't a bad sort. Isn't that fabulous? So the last one, he almost deserved it. Now he wasn't a bad sort. And then we go into the book, and this is Lewis talking about transformation. And so the kids go, he sees Jill, they're at the Experiment House, which is a terrible modern school. Lewis, as an aside, really hated modern education. Didn't like the loss of tradition, didn't like not talking about values, didn't like steering away from critical literature. And he wrote an entire book called The Abolition of Man, which was a critique of his view about what had happened to modern education and how it lost its way. And those feelings are very apparent here about the opening of the book about the Experiment House. He also talked about it in great length from That Hideous Strength, the last book in the science trilogy. And I'm gonna if I remember, do a few quotes from me. So Eustace, also known as Scrubb, sees Jill. They're fleeing from a bunch of bullies. And Eustace says to her, "You think there has been a change then," said Eustace. And this is what Jill says back to Eustace. "It's not only me," said Jill. "Everyone's been saying so. They've noticed. Eleanor Blackenstone heard Adela Pennyfeather talking about it in our changing room yesterday. She said, someone's got a hold of that Scrubb kid. He's quite unmanageable this term. We shall have to attend to him next." So Eustace has been to Narnia, and he has been transformed. And if you recall what Eustace was, a quick quote from Voyage of the Dawn Treader, with greedy, dragonish thoughts in his heart, he had become a dragon himself. That's Eustace pre-dragon. Eustace gets de-dragoned, and now we see Eustace in this book as a transformed person. And it's just so nicely done. So now, in the spirit of jumping around and confusing you, I want to go to Dietrich Bonhoeffer and take it back to our world on transformation. So this is a book by Eric Metaxas on Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer, of course, is a great American saint who was essentially martyred being part of a plot to assassinate Hitler. And so he found his Christianity actually in America, and not by attending seminary. He went to a church there that was caught up in a bunch of things other than preaching the gospel. So I want to give a quote about that, a Union Seminary. In New York, this is a letter from Bonhoeffer. They preach about virtually everything. Only one thing is not addressed, or is addressed so rarely that I have yet been unable to hear it, namely the gospel of Jesus Christ, the cross, sin, forgiveness, death, and life. I would note that since a key theme of the book we're reading are the signs, as Christians, we could do worse then keep the signs being gospel of Christ, the cross, sin, forgiveness, life, and death. Those might be parallel signs. And then he talks about his own transformation. This is Bonhoeffer, and then we'll get back to Eustace. Another letter in 1936 after his transformation. For all my loneliness, I was quite pleased with myself. Then the Bible, and in particular the Sermon on the Mount, freed me from that. Since then, everything has changed. I have felt this plainly, and so have other people about me. It was a great liberation. It became clear to me that the life of a servant of Jesus Christ must belong to the church, and step by step, it became plainer to me how far that must go. So this is a modern transformation figure, and it's kind of fun to keep that in mind as we go to a fictional transformation figure.
Who's the author again?
The author of this book is
Bonhoeffer.
Eric Metaxas.
Thank you.
And this is a fabulously good book. It's a very easy read. He also did Amazing Grace on William Wilberforce, which is another figure of tremendous transformation. So add that to your reading list. So then we move into the book. Eustace and Joy end up escaping into the high plains above Narnia. Joy taunts Eustace is standing on the edge of a cliff. Eustace stumbles, falls off. Aslan blows him to Narnia. And then Jill is there crying. And then here is a great quote. Aslan comes up, but Jill is crying. And so here's a quote from Lewis. Crying is all right in its own way while it lasts, but you have to stop sooner or later, and then you still have to decide what to do. That's a great Lewis quote, because at the end of the day, it's about choice. It's about deciding what to do. And that's a theme throughout. So Jill then encounters Aslan. The lion had swept up, had blown Eustace to Narnia, and then Jill follows him into the woods. She's very, very thirsty. And this tells us a little bit about Aslan. She gets to a stream. She doesn't want to eat, or she wants to drink, but she's scared of the lion. And so she says to the lion, will you promise not to do anything to me if I do come, said Jill. I make no promise, said the lion. Jill was so thirsty now, without noticing it, she had to take a step closer. Do you eat girls? She said. I have swallowed up girls, boys, women, kings, emperors, cities, realms, said the lion. It didn't say this as if it were boastful, nor as if it were sorry, nor as if it were angry. It just said so. And so Jill finally goes up and drinks. So it's Aslan making no promise, Jill having to take the water. There is a little bit of nice John reference there about the water. And then she has to get her task from Aslan. She admits that she had, or at least tempted Eustace to fall over, and Aslan then gives her signs. And so I'm going to tell the signs because this is what the whole book is based on. I will tell you, child, these are the signs for which I will give you in your quest. First, as soon as the boy Eustace sets foot in Narnia, he will meet an old friend and dear friend. He must greet that friend at once. If he does not, he will both have good help. Second, you must journey out of Narnia to the north till you come to the ruined city of the ancient giants. Third, you shall find a writing on a stone in that ruined city, and you must do what the writing tells you. Fourth, you will know the lost prince if you find him by this. He will be the first person you have met in your travels and who will ask you to do something in my name, in the name of Aslan. She's then supposed to repeat this every night and every morning and keep it forefront in her mind. And so those are her signs. Bonhoeffer would give you a different set of signs, but it's the same thing. They are the signs that need to be repeated, or she will lose her way on the journey. And of course, she loses her way on the journey. She forgets the signs, and we'll get to that in a minute. So the kids go to Narnia. He doesn't greet Prince Caspian, who's very old by this time. Time is different in Narnia. They get taken to the castle, which is being run by the dwarf Trumpkin. They flee with the owls, and they find their way. They get declared to be the king's men, and they start off on their journey. They were worried that Trumpkin would hold them captive because so many people have gone searching for the Prince Rilian, who's disappeared. So the crisis in Narnia is there is no successor to the throne because Rilian had been gone for 10 years and no one knew where he was, and all of the people of the kingdom, all the bravest men had gone off searching for him and no one had returned. And so this is the story about finding Rilian. So they go off on this adventure with assistance from the owls, and they meet the great Puddleglum. And this is the first thing Puddleglum has to say. "Good morning, guest," it said. They did not yet know that it's a marsh wiggle. "Though, when I say good, I don't mean it probably won't turn to rain, or it might be snow, or fog, or thunder. You didn't get any sleep, I dare say." "Yes, we did, though," said Jill. "We had a lovely night." So that is throughout the book. There is this great glum humor from Puddleglum. But Puddleglum always kind of knows the right way. They have to go through giants. He says, keep straight on. Don't get distracted from them. Don't worry. He is the true figure. And in the Lewis framework, sort of the figure of faith, the person that doesn't lose his way, the person that doesn't get distracted, the person that just keeps persisting. In this sense, he's very similar to the cabbie that we meet in the last book of Lewis, just sort of good, genuine knowledge. They go on their journey, they pass through the giants who are throwing stones, and there's a great thing of this. They're working their way toward Tarfang, which is the giant kingdom of the north, which is where they were told to go. And they see a beautiful queen followed by a silent knight in armor. And this queen tells them to go into the giant castle and say that they've been sent by her for dinner. And talks about warm beds and nice things to eat. And the kids were so tired that really took over their senses. And so this is the effect of the queen tempting them. Whatever the queen had intended by telling them about Harfang, the actual effect on the children was a bad one. They could think about nothing but beds and baths and hot meals and how lovely it would be to get indoors. They never talked about Aslan or even about the lost prince now. And Jill gave up her habit of repeating the signs over to herself every night and morning. So she made a bunch of excuses about it, but the temptation of essentially worldly comfort had her lose the sense of the signs. And so further on in the book, we start seeing the effect of that. She had the order wrong. That was because she had given up saying the signs every night. She still really knew them, she troubled to think, but she was no longer so pat in her lesson as to be sure of reeling them off in the right order at a moment's notice and without thinking. Puddleglum's question annoyed her because deep down inside her, she was really annoyed with herself for not knowing the lion's lesson quite so well as she thought she should. And of course, she later says, bother signs. And of course, what had happened was they had missed the third sign. They were climbing up towards the hill. She had slid in a bank, and she was walking down these series of paths, a little bit like a maze, and she was in fact in the third sign, and she was walking through the letters under. And so Puddleglum was wanting to stop and think and reflect, but Jill's temptation of the comfortable bed and all the things that the queen, who we later discover is a witch, had tempted her with, had lost her way. And so because of that, they end up in the castle of the giants, and they discover that in fact, when they were invited for dinner, they were going to be dinner, and the giants were going to eat them at their annual festival. And so the consequence was very real. Aslan comes to her in a dream and helps her to repeat the signs. And what she remembered was the sign was under me. They look out at the castle and see down below where they were before and see the words under me, and they had been walking there. They had missed that sign. And so they managed to escape. They flee the giants. They go into the words under me, and then they slide into an underworld. And they're deep down in caves. So think about caves of dwarfs from Tolkien's books and The Hobbit and things like that. They're deep down, and they're in a different world and really a different kingdom, and they're very disoriented. And this is a key statement from Puddleglum, because they're lost. They think, how could this be going well? How could we be following the signs if we're in this cave and we can't see where we're going? And this is what Puddleglum says. Aslan's instructions always work. There are no exceptions. But how to do it now, that's another matter. Isn't that fabulous? Aslan's instructions always work. They're in the middle of a cave. They can't see. They're in an underworld kingdom. And Puddleglum doesn't lose faith. Next key thought. So, extent to which I've had key thoughts, follow the signs, don't lose sight of them. The next key thought is really a discussion of kingdoms. Dwight talks about the kingdom of God and how we operate with a kingdom, and a little Dallas Willard, if there is a kingdom, there has to be a king. And of course, in our world, that is Christ. In this world, it is Aslan. In this underworld kingdom, it's a very different kingdom. And so there's all these gnomes in this underworld kingdom, and this is how they look. Every face in the whole 100, these earthmen, they call them, was so sad as a face could be. They were so sad that after the first glance, Jill almost forgot to be afraid of them. She felt she would like to cheer them up. So that is what it is to be in a kingdom without a good king. They happen to be in a kingdom with a bad queen, in this instance, the evil witch that we'll meet is sort of modeled after one of the northern witches. You've known her because we have the White Witch in the first book, and we have Jadis, the evil witch, and the magician's nephew coming up, and this is another witch. So essentially, Lewis, over time, has 3 witches, and this is one of those witches. And so they are captured by these earthmen. They're taken deep down into the cave. They're being taken against their will, and this is how Puddleglum cheers Jill up, who is also called Pole. So it's confusing because she's Jill, she's Pole. Eustace is also called Scrub. So bear with us. Now, don't let your spirits down, Pole, said the Marshwiggle. There's one thing you've got to remember. We're back on the right lines. We were to go under the ruined city, and we are under it. We're following the instructions. So isn't that great? They're following the instructions, even though it looks very bleak. So they go through more adventures in the underworld, and Puddleglum has another great quote. "Don't you mind," said Puddleglum, "there are no accidents. Our guide is Aslan, and he was there when the giant king caused the letters to be cut, and he already knew all things that would come of them, including this. So there are no accidents." So this is a book in large part about faith. It's about following the signs. It's about the wisdom of Puddleglum. And it's about the kids. I haven't done all the quotes, but the kids are becoming much better kids. They apologize to each other. They admit mistakes. They care for each other. They get there. They ultimately meet the knight who is out of his armor, and he is also under the spell. And so what happens every night in this underworld is Prince William is tied to a silver chair. And you see there, that is Rillian destroying the silver chair. That is the graphic. And so for a brief period during the night, he realizes he's a captive and he's Prince Rillian, and that the witch that has him, in fact, is the same witch that at the time was a serpent that bit his mother. She died. And so he's been held captive by this terrible creature. And he's tied to the chair. The children see him, and he's crying out. He's crazy. But then he says, "Oh, by all fears and by all loves," this is Rillian crying out, "by the bright skies of Overland, by the great lion, by Aslan himself, I charge you." So that was the last sign. That's the fourth sign. Rillian has just said the fourth sign, but the children are looking at this person who's a lunatic. He's foaming at the mouth. He's crazy. They don't know what they should do. And to quote again, "It was a dreadful question. What had been the use of promising one another that they would not on any account set the knight free, if they were now to do so the first time he happened to call out upon a name they really cared about? On the other hand, what had been the use of learning all the signs if they weren't going to obey them? Yet could Aslan have really meant them to unbind anyone, even a lunatic, who asked it in his name? Could it be a mere accident? Or how, if the queen of the underworld knew all about the signs, had made the knight learn this simply in order to entrap them?" So you see the quandary. The signs make no sense. They have to free a lunatic. And so now here's Puddleglum again. "I don't know about that," said Puddleglum. "You see, Aslan didn't tell Pole what would happen. He only told her what to do. That fellow will be the death of us once he's up, I shouldn't wonder, but that doesn't let us off following the sign." So that's a great statement of faith. And again, it's Puddleglum. They do it. It turns out Rillian is fine. And the queen comes back, has a powder, enchants them again, and tries to put them under her spell. And so she tells them, Puddleglum, there is no Narnia, no overworld, no sky, no sun, no Aslan. And now to bed all, let us begin a wiser life tomorrow. But first to bed, to sleep, deep sleep, soft pillows, sleep without foolish dreams. And so that's how enchantment works. Distracting you with worldly possessions, distracting you with sleep, making you believe what you've seen in the light is false when you're in the dark. And that is what the queen is doing, slowly entrapping them. And now, just a quick jump, and I'm almost done with my stickums. This is from that Hideous Strength. Sorry for that. The last in his science trilogy. It's a little bit of a long book. If you're just going to read one of these, I would read the one before it, Pearlandria. But it's good, and it's a comment on modern culture. And one of the key characters, Mark, was sucked into the academic environment of this group that was an awful lot like Experiment House. And he was almost drugged. Okay. Yeah, he was brought into the group, was warm, and almost drugged atmosphere of vague yet heavily important confidence in which he was gradually being enfolded. So that is what this group does. And this group, this is how it's described. We are, as I have said before, more like a family, or even perhaps like a single personality. So this is the key concept of Lewis. Evil, which is what Queen represents, draws you in. You lose your individuality. You become part of a single personality, like the poor, entrapped earthmen that are there. And so she, like happens to us, is enchanting them with temptation. And then, of course, Puddleglum snaps him out of it, steps on fire that she had done that was creating the spell, burns himself. And this is a great statement from Puddleglum. I am on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. So that, of course, is Pascal's wager. What's the downside in believing in God and believing in the kingdom? If there is one, you gained all. If there's not one, what have you lost? You've had a better life, right? So essentially, Puddleglum, in the midst of this underworld, breaks himself out of the enchantment by essentially stating Pascal's wager. They get free, they live out of the enchantment, they escape, and they get back to Narnia. But they're not sure they're going to get out. And of course, this is another Puddleglum. They're trying to escape. Water's coming up. It's very hazardous. And Puddleglum doesn't lose faith. And courage, friends, came Prince Rilian's voice. Whether we live or die, Aslan will be our good lord. That's right, sir, said Puddleglum's voice. And you must always remember, there's one good thing about being trapped down here. It'll save us funeral expenses. So that's Puddleglum. They escape that terrible kingdom, and they get back to Narnia. Rilian sees his father, Caspian, who's been told in a vision to return to Narnia. He had sailed off looking for the prince. He gives him his blessing. And then Caspian, who was a young man in the voyage of the Dawn Treader, goes essentially to heaven. He appears in a stream, born young. So this is comes out of it young, and he frolics with Aslan, which is a wonderful image of being in heaven. And he asks Aslan if this is now Caspian, if he can look into the world that men come from, because Eustace and Jill are about to return to the experiment house. And this is a great statement from Aslan. You cannot want wrong things anymore now that you have died, my son. So you're no longer in heaven, you're no longer tempted. So all that you want is alignment with good. And so his need to want wrong things is gone. The children return to Experiment House, and for a brief moment, everybody there, the wall opens and all the kids and the teachers look at this huge lion who, as we know, is big as Trafalgar lions in Trafalgar Square. The kids go in, and there's so much commotion that they get in there, and nobody notices them. They call the police, of course, the Experiment House does, and they think the head master is crazy, so he or she is fired or actually promoted. That's Lewis's disdain for modern education, and becomes a better place. So that is the silver chair, and I've been almost exactly what I thought I would do. I've been about a half hour, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have about this book or Narnia series or Lewis or whatever may be on your mind. Are there any questions? Carver, do you see them, or should I go to the chat?
I've got a couple written down here, and then an interesting note. The gentleman that Honey, I Shrunk Kids, Jurassic Park 3, and Jumanji is cutting out Disney's The Silver Chair. They were starting to film.
So the silver chair, they can't hear you. So the silver chair is coming to the big screen.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. So question.
Yeah. On Experiment House, a couple questions. Lewis makes fun of progressive education when he speaks about Experiment House. Was he satirizing? I think he talked about that at the end, but.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis, there was a stream of thought that he addresses in The Abolition of Man, which is sort of the denial of this notion of absolute good or external good or truth. And that bothered Lewis because he thinks everything hinges on the notion that there's something outside of ourselves. And when you remove that notion that there's something outside of yourself, that there isn't an essentially external good, then everything is relative. And if everything is relative, then you have to operate somewhere, and so you end up operating with people that proclaim themselves to be the guardians, the keeper of knowledge. And so the term he uses in The Abolition of Man is the guardians, the people that know something that you don't know. And so that is what he is rebelling against. And if you jump to Mere Christianity, he starts that book with this notion that we have a moral code, and that moral code must have come from outside our system. So this is a very fundamental Lewis thought, and one that caused him great distress, this notion of relativism, this denial of something outside of ourselves, and this notion that there are people that declare themselves the guardians, which in a sense are just trying to assess power or claim power in his view.
Is that why he wouldn't show his face to the police in the Experiment House?
Who?
So Aslan, sorry.
Oh, he did. Aslan did show his face. I mean, people saw Aslan. They saw a glimpse of Aslan. They didn't know what to make of him, and so they thought it was some terrible creature that was at loose. I would note one thing about Aslan. This is a Narnia book where he never appears in Narnia. He's always on the higher plane. He's always outside of Narnia, and he appears in a dream. But Aslan himself never physically appears in Narnia. So it's an interesting catch on it. Other questions?
Yep. Let me do this one, then we'll ask for.
Okay.
Caspian resurrections come via Aslan's blood. Is that obvious Christian reference? Or?
Yeah, Caspian dies and then he appears in the stream. So I don't know if, I don't quite see that. I mean, when he died on the stone table, that was a clear crucifixion reference in the first book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I could be wrong. I'm not seeing that exact reference here, but the notion that Caspian is reborn as his young, healthy, vibrant self, and that he had a playful, loving relationship with Aslan, with them wrestling in the grass and Aslan licking his face. It's very tender, and it's actually the same sort of Aslan that appeared in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when he came back to life after dying on the stone table. That's the way he greeted. That's the way he greeted Lucy and Susan. So we have the same sort of playful, loving Aslan. So any questions from the Zoom? I guess you could go off mute and.
That's Eric.
Oh, you made it, Eric.
Oh yeah,
That's great.
So I was struck immediately as you were by the parallel with Pascal's wager in that one passage. And if people are not familiar with Pascal's wager, it's basically that Pascal reasoned that you got a decision tree. If you believe, good things happen. If you don't believe, you go to hell, which is kind of an infinite loss. And you don't need much of a probability on that infinite loss to make it worthwhile for you to believe. Now, so I think that there is a subtle difference between Pascal's wager and at least the way I read this, and that is there's not that infinite loss, I don't think, in Narnia. it may, and this is kind of subtle, but it may be that it's a little more consistent with Deutsch. If you live with the kingdom of God, the laws of kingdom of God, you'll live a better life than everybody else will. But I'm not sure there's the infinite loss aspect in Narnia. What do you think?
Lewis was not a Puritan. He was not a damnation kind of guy. Yeah. And you'll see that in the premise of the Great Divorce, right? Where people go from hell and come up to the border of heaven, and they can enter heaven if they get rid of what's trapping them and keeping them in hell. And only one does that. But so Lewis is very vague on that point, but he doesn't have damnation. I haven't seen anything of damnation or fire and brimstone type stuff in Lewis's writing. He was deeply influenced by George MacDonald, who believed strongly that people don't actually go to hell, that it's sort of this purgatory, that God's desire to be in relationship with us overcomes all obstacles over time. And Lewis says he doesn't subscribe to that precisely, but he never countered what he meant. I think the other thing that's interesting about Lewis is this notion of heaven, right? Dallas Willard reads the Hebrew. In Greek, according to Willard, and I may have this wrong if Deutsch still on, although I think I see him leave the screen. The Greek puts heaven above. It interprets heaven as above. And the Hebrew has heaven around. And that's a very key distinction, above versus around. And you'll see here that heaven essentially is around them. It's on a plane. It's something they move in and out of. So I think that's a powerful concept in Lewis's theology as well. And we see that in the Screwtape Letters, where the patient dies and realizes that he was in heaven all the time, that the angels were around him all the time. And so Lewis has this sense that these differences in the world are not as distinct as a Puritan might think. Other questions? I see Camille. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Can you talk about the Guardians of Knowledge? Was that kind of meant in an ironic tone when he was talking about education and that type of thing?
Yes. He is disdainful of the guardians, disdainful of the people that were the heads of what is called nice and the hideous strength, that are telling people what to do based on secret knowledge. And that was, and in the Abolition of Man, he called that group of people the guardians. And his logic is this, that if you don't believe that there's some external truth, then we must rely on a certain class of people to interpret what is correct and what is wrong. And those people tend to be bullies. And that in order to keep ourselves oriented in this world, we have to align ourselves with external truth as represented in the Bible and through our sense of the Gospels, and to be wary or skeptical of people that claim to have truth that's not scripturally grounded.
Okay, thank you.
I was curious about when they get back to Narnia and Jill gets in and gets caught up in the great snow dance and forgets all about them, and I wondered what he was praying about there.
Well, no, Jill, so they're trying to escape from the underworld, and Jill comes up, and she comes out of a hole that's on a bank. So she actually sees the starlight, it's night, and she falls down a hill. And so she wasn't pulled out or captured, which is of course what Rillian and Puddleglum thought, and Eustace.
Right.
She then says, "Hey, there's these guys in the hill, Prince Rillian and my friend," and they go up and dig him out. So at that point she was remembering the signs, And so, you know, that's a great scene where everybody recognizes Rillian and they rush him to see Caspian. And Caspian had a dream from Aslan to return home. He was off sailing to the Lone Islands to try to find his son.
Right.
And he comes home and he finally sees his son and gives him the blessing. So after they go into the underworld, they stay on the right track. She was not doing very well prior to that, basically 0 for 3, but she got the last one, which I find, maybe back to Eric's question, Lewis has a very forgiving, you know, Aslan's a very forgiving lion, as lions go. You can get off track and you can get back on track, and he doesn't slap him around like you would think a normal lion would. Another question? I think I see Inez.
Hi.
Do you have a question, Inez, or a thought?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had to leave and come back, so I missed something. So I didn't mean, I should have put myself on mute.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm a little out of touch, but as soon as I came back, I wanted to see what you were talking about. So
Okay.
thank you.
Well, thank you for coming back. And hope springs eternal that Deutt will come back. Boy, I'll tell you, that guy's attention span. Any other questions? And I have a parting thought. No? Okay. Well, we're coming up to our 40 minutes. Here's a thought and something that I've lost my own picture. Okay. Here I go. Okay, so I can see if I'm holding this up. So I think somewhat obviously our signs come from the Bible. Dietrich Bonhoeffer started with the Sermon on the Mount, and everything went out from the Sermon on the Mount. And so since I'm kind of an original source guy, I figured to be a Christian, one should probably read the Bible. And so the best method I have found is this thing called the 1 Year Bible. And what it is it is Old Testament, New Testament, and a Psalm and a proverb every day. So it works through the Bible, broken into 365 days with a reading of the Old Testament, New Testament, Psalm, and proverb. So you don't get weighed down fighting your way through Leviticus or something like that. And it's just hard to do. And I found it to be just a wonderful way to move through the Bible. So I would commend it to you. I will note with great humility that I made it through to about November of last year. Then I kind of fell off the habit. And this year when COVID hit, I lost about 6 weeks, and then I decided just to start resuming. So now I'm 2 days behind. So it's kind of spurty for me, but hopefully since I already missed my 2 months, I'll get all the way through this year. So I figured as Christians, our signs come from here, and our challenge is to follow them. So that's my take on it. So next week, a preview. Actually, it's my favorite Lewis book, or not favorite book per se, but my favorite Narnia book, The Horse and His Boy. So read this book this week. It is just such a fun book. And it's a great adventure story. And that is what we will discuss next week. The Horse and His Boy. And then we'll take a break over the 4th of July weekend. And then we'll do the last 2 after that. So Horse and His Boy is on deck. Everybody have a great day.
What are the last 2?
The last 2 will then be The Magician's Nephew and The Last Battle.
Okay.
So I'm doing the books in the order in which they were published, not the chronological order. So you'll buy new Lewis books that have a different order, and that's only because they're wrong.
I have Jonathan, I have a question about if we're going to the in the garden 11 o'clock service, do we still Zoom at the same time before? You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
let me fall back and talk to Laura about that. Yeah, I don't want to do something that's conflicts with anything else the church is doing. So let me understand that.
They'll figure it out. Maybe we'll do it after the service or in between.
Maybe we do it after the service, or maybe it depends on what they do with the everybody hour. Maybe we do it at 10 to 11 or
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
You'll let us know?
I'll let you know. And thank you for raising that.
Okay.
So yeah, stay tuned on that. I
Okay.
guess that's a
Thank you.
great thought.
All right.
I have a question about the one-year Bible version.
Okay.
Does it matter? I'm looking at Kindle versions and several.
This is an NIV version, 365 days. Make sure you get it so that it's broken between Old Testament, New Testament, Psalms, because you can just get a standard Bible. I actually gave one to Janice Ketchum that was just a standard Bible. So be clear that it is broken up this way. Otherwise, it's very tough sledding. I shouldn't probably say that.
That's true.
What a
Maybe
great
it's-
expression. Did you invent that? I love it. I want to use it. Tough
Um,
sledding.
Excuse me, I have a question. What
Okay.
is the publisher? Because I have to go through a used bookstore to get these things. So it's good to know the publisher, I think.
Okay. Tyndale. Let me see. Tyndale House Publishers. Wheaton, Illinois. Tyndale.
Thank you.
Wheaton.
And you said NIV?
This is NIV. I think they do it in another version, but the one I have is NIV.
What does that mean, NIV?
New International Version.
I'm sorry, okay.
It does. I mean, there's multiple different versions, and this one just happens to be the NIV.
And it's Tyndale Publishing, and where is that?
Wheaton, Illinois,
Thank you very much.
which incidentally is where they keep the Lewis papers, but that's another discussion. Well, good. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next week, noting, of course, that we've got to figure out the time. And so thank you for catching that. I appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you
to see
so much.
everybody. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.